Welcome back. Thank you to my patrons, old and new. It's greatly appreciated. Thank you guys. Here today I'm going to make a rolling bar cart. This is a conversation that's been going on for some time with the guys that wanted this. This is for Don Julio Tequila. I got some reference off the internet that they wanted me to sort of go by, but I thought the idea of making it a road case to keep it durable, because these things I build always break. And in this case, I went with the road case idea. I went online, I just Googled make your own road case, and a website showed up named Make Your Own Road Case, something to that effect. I'll put it in the description. And I'm just using 1/2-inch walnut. I got this at Premium Plywood up near Albany. And this aluminum cuts just like wood. A lot of people asked if I changed the blade. No, that's a wood blade. And I cut slow so that my cuts aren't rough. So I do a slow pass down through. And I'm just sketching this out. I don't know exactly what I'm doing here, but I just know that if I make all the pieces the same size, I'm going to have 2 exact size boxes. And there was a decision whether to make compound angles where all 3 of those intersect at each corner. And I just kept it simple. And I made the uprights have a flat cut, and then the corners that frame the top and bottom, which I just cut there, have the bevels. And it's going to get a corner cover anyway, and that corner cover is going to keep it all concealed and connected. I mean, I probably could have just had the ends all just come together without even being beveled, and it would have still worked, but obviously it's just stronger and neater to have it all come together like I did. And I'm just feeling it out as I go, trimming. And then there's a whole edge that goes around the open boxes, which I left out the assemblage of that, but you'll see it in this next shot there, in the open edge. And they're meant to nest together. It's basically the same exact extrusion that just flops on top of one another and it nests in it. So now they're all fit together, and now I'm putting the hinge on, I'm drilling through. And I crazy glued the edge on just for the workaround while I'm working with it. Everything is tapped all the way into place and nested. And I use crazy glue inside, knowing that if I use polyurethane later, it'll disguise it. And now here I'm putting in all the couplings in. I'm trying to make neat cuts so that when you do see them from the inside, at least it looks fairly neat. And I've never made a road case, but it's really easy. If you just, everything sort of dictates what shape it should be, the cutouts that should be. There really wasn't any special instructions that I followed. I just tried to make sure that every cut I made was not going to become exposed outside of the flange, and so I made it really tight. In this case I had to use the die grinder to get it to seat in there nice and flat. And I'm using 1/2-inch flathead screws that I have. There was no time. I got maybe 4 days notice to make this thing before I had to leave to come to California, where I am now. And I'm really happy with it. I liked the aluminum look, and I was hoping to keep it, but then at one point I got a phone call that said we wanted it gold, just like you said in the beginning. Because the gold's just going to rub off. This thing is going to get abused and dropped and thrown around. I know it. It should be where it's supposed to go by now. I haven't heard anything. Usually I only get phone calls when there's bad news. I never get phone calls when there's good news. So no news is good news. And now I'm routering out. I didn't have to cut all the way through to pocket these handles in. I only had to go about 3/8 of a way into this 1/2-inch material. And so I'm just using a little plunge router. It's a DeWalt plunge router. And that plunge base I never use. I've only just started using it in the last couple of projects, maybe in the last year and a half. Last year I've used it a couple times. Vacuuming up. I should have had my mask on there. I'm sorry, Mom. And now here I'm just screwing that down. Somebody asked why there's multiple types of screws in this handle. You'll notice it's riveted together before it even is assembled onto the unit. And there we go. I'm just checking. It looks good. And now I'm putting in little hex head screws from the inside through the framework into each panel. So each rib gets about 3 screws, and so now it is screwed together. And then this will also help hold it together, because that's going to keep each one of the panels connected through that corner brace, and that is really going to add a lot of strength to it, and keeps everything pulled together. And I did not buy half braces, which is why I end up making them ultimately. And this is a little tip: whenever I do wheels, I just screw them into place, knowing that I have to go all the way through to the other side. So they're all just screwed in place. And I put the washer there because I didn't have screws big enough to not go through there. And I drill all 3 of the other holes, bolt them in place, then take out the screw, and now everything's in place. And then the last one I do is where the screw is. You can see here I'm just doing a little setting the screw head in there. I'm using a flat slotted head screw that goes in from the other side. And I had quarter 20 screws, and I didn't have short ones, so I had to use the only ones I had, and then I cut them short, which is pretty common for me. I never have the right size anything. I just improvise. And I have a ratchet on the drill driver there, and I'm just socking them all down. Didn't have washers in the shop. Again, this is probably midnight. I'm working. You see it's dark in the garage door there, so it's late. And now I go back in, I cut all the heads off, and then I go in and I do all those ones where the screw is. And this is my first test out of focus. Only shot I got of that spot. Looks really good. We ultimately ended up putting on locking wheels, 2 locking wheels, before it went out in shipment. That was after the end of this video. And now here I'm just polyurethaning it. I tried to do as many coats as I could in the few days I had left to deliver this. Or rather, before I left the shop. Brett ended up packing it and shipping it to California. And now here I'm doing those half braces that go where the doors open up or where the cabinets come apart. And I'm just using old aluminum I had. I didn't have anything clean, so I take these and I clean them up on the sander. I'm using my same template. I'm drilling the holes. I just taped over one of the corner brackets and just left out the one side I didn't need to get a template for that. And I did not have any more domed head screws. This is my new brake. Using that for the first time. Just mark in the middle and gives me a nice right angle. It's nice having a brake. I knew once I got one I would just immediately incorporate it into the daily workflow. So right here on the corners I use the domed head screws, and here I use the flathead screws. I just had to go with what I got. As long as all those are the same and all the corners are the same, I feel it's somewhat justified. Again, making this thing in a rush with not having the time to prepare for it. Most of these guys I work for, if they have a good idea, they think of it and they work on it and they work on it and they work on it and they think about it and they think about it and they go, okay, we need it tomorrow. And it's usually always the case, unfortunately. Now I'm making a bracket that's going to carry these bottles. I wanted to make something knowing that no matter which way this case went, left, right, upside down, maybe on its side, these bottles would somewhat stay in place. And later on I put leather to secure these bottles in place. That leather ended up kind of being like a neoprene or like a foam rubber. I'm using that new DeWalt nailer, which works really good. It's a bit clumsy, but it's about the same half as clumsy as dragging a hose around, so it's the same thing, but it's a little more convenient that you don't have the hose and the compressor going off all the time. And there it is. I'm showing how the bottles are going to be presented, and all the heavy weight stays in the bottom of the box. So I nailed them together gently just to get my construction going, and then I put screws everywhere. And then I covered the screws up with pieces of Ipe. That's Ipe that I had laying around. And I'm just doing my little technique where Brett is handing me the piece that just went through, and I'm using it as the push stick for the new piece. And now I'm nailing these in place, and you'll notice I'm just go straight over those holes. I'm waiting for the glue to dry. I'll come back and cut those holes open. Instead of trying to cut everything perfect, I let things run long, and in this case I had to make sure they were perfect because they were in between. But wherever I have the opportunity to let them run long and sand up to it, I usually do. And now I'm kind of going with a nautical thing here on the front of this, where I have the Ipe covers the screw holes there, you notice. And now I'm using my Armadillo. It's my little palm belt sander. And now here I am coming back, cutting out those little segments, making sure the bottles fit. And that's the only way to get all 3 of those segments to be perfect. Actually 4 segments. And now here I'm trimming up some wood that's left over from the previous cuts. I'm going to use those to make the trays. And again, I didn't know exactly what they wanted. They couldn't really tell me exactly what size they needed. They just need to have bar supplies. So you see I'm using those pieces of scrap plywood just to make sure everything's consistent. I could have fiddled it around and made sure it landed on the line, but with those pieces of scrap plywood in place, I know exactly where it's going to be, and it's going to be exactly the same on the second one I make. Just making trays. I'm kind of like I said, this is going to be kind of like a nautical thing, and the fact that it's moving around, cups and trays and glasses are going to fall out. I went back after the video and put a little tray just like that edge there, that edge tray band, on the back as well. Right here I stick them in, and I left, you see how the back to the camera is open. I put the same thing that I'm working on the front, I put it on the back too. Started thinking about it, and I made these trays so they're removable. They go into the unit and they come right back out, and if you were to take them back out, of course the back had nothing on it, everything would fall right off the back. So now those are full front and back exactly the same in real life, not necessarily in this video though. Covering up all my end grain. I had some leeway here. I had a little bit of artistic license and also not enough time as usual. And I cover everything. Everything really needed one more sanding and one more coat of poly, but there was no drying time. And it was a bit cold in upstate New York, so. And those are just stuck in place so that they kind of sit there. And there you see I did the same thing with the two upper trays. So if they wanted to use this cabinet for something else down the road, they could. And that's Taylor. That was her idea. She said, why don't we wrap these ugly handles with leather? It gives it that touch. And then that gave me the idea to put the leather here, which at first I wasn't sure what I was going to do. I thought I was just going to put wood veneer in there, but now that makes it much stronger. It gives it that snug feel. And here, this is after the phone call I got. I thought everything was going to be gold, and I was like, well, I was trying to sell you on the silver because it's going to scratch, it's going to stay the same. They go, let's go with the gold. And so here we went with the gold. And it looked good. A lot of people came in the shop and said, wow, that looks so much better gold. I personally would have kept it silver, but sometimes my opinion doesn't count. And here we are. We're basically done, and now it's time for branding. And the new Don Julio brand is just the head. It's the head of Don Julio with this sort of jaggedy edge. I'm not quite sure. I didn't design it. I was just using it. And there's the laser cut. That's thin leather, rawhide. And I used some 3M90. I put it in place, hammer it, and 3M90. And I want that to ultimately be the same color as the handles, which is old leather that Taylor recycled from a chair she took apart. And so I use a little furniture wax just to darken it. And in time, on its own, it will begin to get that richer, deeper orange. I'm just helping it along here with some furniture wax there. And then this was just an added bonus because I kept dropping the bottles and cups on top, and I knew that it would bing it up. So this is a way for them to get a little bit more branding. That's just, again, some old recycled leather from one of Taylor's chairs she dismantled. And now what we have is two little drink mats. We open it up and we put the drink mats on top, which if I had more time I would have wet them and flattened them between two pieces of plexiglass. That would have taken a week to dry though, and they would have been dead flat. But in time they're going to get wet anyway, and there we go. I was very happy with this, and like I said, we put two locking wheels on one of each corner after this was, because it was really roly-poly. And there we go. Thank you for watching. Thank you for my new patrons and my old patrons. I really appreciate it, guys. Hope you learned something.